My stepson told me I should stay silent at his wedding. I cut up my bank card and canceled every payment. The bank notifications arrived faster than the guests finished their champagne. Subscribe to the channel and share your stories in the comments. And now, let's get started. I used to believe that love was a slow accumulation of small, invisible things. Cups of coffee left waiting on the counter, midnight drives to the pharmacy, quiet endurance. For nearly 2 decades, I built my life out of those gestures. When Laura and I met, her son Tyler was 8. Wide-eyed, all knees and questions, half broken by the man who had walked away. Dan, his biological father, was the kind of ghost who sent postcards from nowhere, promising to visit when the stars aligned and never meaning it. I didn't replace him. I just filled the silence he left behind. I taught Tyler how to ride a bike on the cracked pavement behind our old duplex. I stood in the rain at his first soccer match, soaked to the bone while Dan was probably asleep 3 states away. I was there for his school plays, his late-night fevers, his first heartbreak at 16. Every milestone carved a small place for me inside a life that wasn't originally mine. And through all of it, I believed the same simple lie, that consistency would one day be rewarded with belonging. Laura would sometimes whisper that I tried too hard. "You don't need to buy his love, Michael," she'd say when I slipped another 20 into his pocket or paid for another camp trip. But I wasn't buying anything, I was investing. In him. In us. I thought patience was the currency of love. When college came, the costs were heavy, but I carried them like I always had. Tuition, textbooks, dorm supplies. My paycheck was a list of Tyler's needs. He called me Mike back then, never Dad. But I told myself the word didn't matter. Presence mattered. Blood was coincidence. Devotion was choice. I made that choice every single day. Years blurred. We moved to a better neighborhood. I traded sleep for overtime, comfort for stability. When Tyler studied abroad in Spain, it was my signature on the transfer slip that sent him there. Laura cried with pride. I stood behind her, smiling, too tired to feel anything but relief that I could afford to give him what his real father never could. And then, as if time were folding back on itself, the boy returned as a man. Taller, sharper, carrying plans that made the house feel small again. He brought a girl named Megan, the kind whose laughter filled a room and whose hand never left his arm. She looked at me with the polite gratitude reserved for family friends. I saw my place clearly in that glance, helpful, reliable, peripheral. When Tyler announced their engagement, I told myself the years had finally led somewhere. I wanted to believe the story had a reward. "We'll make it beautiful," I told Laura. "He deserves that much." And she nodded, proud, relieved, maybe even touched that I still called him our son. From the first week, the wedding became my second job. I drove them to venue tours, took notes during tastings, compared photographers until my eyes blurred. I covered deposits before they were even requested. Each transaction felt like another brick in the house of love I thought I was still building. Every time I saw Laura's face light up when Tyler thanked her, I convinced myself he simply forgot to thank me, but meant to. The numbers rose quietly. 10,000 for the country club reservation, another 15 for catering. I signed checks for floral arrangements, for custom invitations, for a rehearsal dinner that Megan's parents promised to contribute to later. Later never came. My bank app became a confession booth where I justified every withdrawal. "It's for Tyler. He's my son. This is what fathers do." Some nights, lying awake beside Laura, I'd scroll through the spreadsheet I kept hidden on my laptop. Every expense neatly itemized, every payment traced. $63,000 by the 5th month. I stared at the total until it blurred, wondering how much love was supposed to cost. Then I'd close the screen, kiss her shoulder, and tell myself it didn't matter. Families weren't measured in money. They were measured in sacrifice. Tyler would come by with Megan on weekends, both of them brimming with plans and jargon. "The planner says this, the florist says that," he'd say, his voice quick, distracted. I'd nod, pretending I understood the language of linen textures and centerpiece heights. What I understood was the way he never looked at me when he said thank you. Gratitude had become a habit directed at the air. Sometimes Dan would text Laura, short, awkward messages. Tell Ty I'm proud of him. Wish I could help out. She'd show them to me like a strange relic, as if proof of Dan's existence excused his absence. I would nod, swallow the irritation, and change the subject. After all, wasn't I the bigger man? The steady one? The one who kept everyone from collapsing? One evening, Megan's parents invited us over for dinner. Some polite gesture of alliance between families. I remember the smell of roasted lamb, the delicate laughter, the small boasts about vacation homes and golf memberships. When the check came, her father made a token reach for it, then let me take it instead. He thanked me as if I'd done him a favor, not his future daughter-in-law. Laura looked away, embarrassed. I told myself it didn't matter. Pride was a luxury for men who didn't have responsibilities. As the months passed, the wedding devoured everything. Time, money, even conversation. Laura lived inside planning charts. Tyler called less, texted less, but always appeared when something needed signing. I didn't mind, or told myself I didn't. That's what fathers do. They stand quietly behind the celebration, invisible scaffolding holding up someone else's dream. By spring, the final payments loomed. The photographer needed the remainder. The country club demanded confirmation. The planner hinted about gratuities to ensure the best service. I transferred the funds without hesitation. My account bled, but I called it love. One night, alone in my office, I looked around at the framed photos. Tyler at 10 holding a fishing rod, at 16 grinning beside his first car, at 20 in a cap and gown. Every image was proof of a story I thought we shared. I whispered into the empty room, "He'll see it one day. He'll know who was there." The words felt like prayer and delusion in equal measure. Still, I kept going. Because that's what I had always done. Believe first, regret later. The truth was too heavy to face. That perhaps the years had meant everything to me and nothing to them. That maybe I wasn't family, just the man who signed the checks and stayed polite when the others disappeared. But I didn't let myself dwell on that thought. Not yet. Not until the moment would come, quiet, sharp, final, when I would realize that everything I had built was already slipping through my fingers. For now, the only thing that mattered was that the wedding was coming, and Tyler was happy. I told myself that was enough. It had to be. It happened on a humid Thursday, the kind of day when the air itself feels sticky with expectation. We were at the final meeting with the wedding planner, a polished woman with a constant, professional smile that never quite reached her eyes. The long table in front of us was buried under color charts, sample menus, and schedules printed in gold font. I sat at the end, quiet, my checkbook resting beside my phone. It had become a ritual. I would listen, nod, pay, and pretend my presence meant something more than a signature at the bottom of an invoice. Tyler looked sharp that afternoon. White shirt rolled at the sleeves, confidence radiating off him like heat. Megan sat beside him, scrolling through photos of floral arches. Laura laughed easily, proud, luminous in a way I hadn't seen in years. I should have been happy for them. Instead, I felt like a hired hand watching the family from the doorway. The planner asked about speeches, and that's when it happened. Tyler, without looking up from his notes, said casually, "Make sure my dad, Dan, gets a slot after the ceremony. My stepdad shouldn't really say anything." The words dropped like stones into a still pond. No hesitation. No glance in my direction. Just fact, as if he were confirming a seating chart. For a moment, I thought I had misheard. But he kept talking. Something about how it'll mean a lot for him to be up there. How Mike's fine just helping with logistics. Mike, not dad. Not even family. Logistics. Laura's hand froze on her glass. The planner smiled awkwardly, pretending not to notice the shift in the room. Megan said softly, "That's probably best. Keeps the focus on family." The word family hit harder than the rest. I stared at Tyler's profile, his jawline, the familiar flick of his hair, and saw none of myself there. Just the echo of Dan, the ghost who always got credit for things he never did. And in that moment, something inside me cracked so cleanly that I almost admired the precision of it. I didn't speak. Didn't argue. I simply closed my notebook, nodded once when the planner asked if I agreed, and waited for the meeting to end. The drive home blurred into a smear of headlights and silence. Laura tried to talk. Half-hearted apologies, excuses about Tyler not meaning it that way. I answered with a quiet hum, because I knew he had meant it exactly that way. You don't exclude a man by accident. That night, I sat in my office, surrounded by the evidence of my devotion. Contracts, receipts, payment confirmations. The numbers stared back like witnesses. $63,942. That was the price of being invisible. I opened my banking app. My finger hovered over the final scheduled transfers. Catering, flowers, DJ, bar service, the remaining half of the photographer's fee. All due within the week. Each transaction represented belief that my place at that wedding in that family still existed. But belief had a cost, and mine had reached its limit. So I started canceling. One by one, with the same precision Tyler had used to erase me. Cancel transfer. Freeze card. Withdraw authorization. The bank's notifications pinged like quiet gunshots. I didn't rage. I calculated. If I was to stay silent, then my money would too. Laura was asleep upstairs when I finished. I sat there for a long while, listening to the house breathe. I thought about the years, 20 birthdays, 20 Christmas mornings, 20 times I'd said, "Don't worry, I've got it." I remembered Tyler's face when I gave him his first car, the way he grinned like the world had opened for him. And now he wanted me silent, erased from the record, replaced by the man who had vanished when responsibility came calling. I poured a glass of bourbon, the cheap kind that burns its lesson into your throat. Somewhere between the first and second sip, I realized I wasn't angry. Anger implies hope of change. What I felt was colder, a clarity that stripped everything unnecessary. I had mistaken obligation for love, and now the debt was coming due. The next morning, Laura noticed I was different. "You barely slept," she said, searching my face. I smiled faintly, just thinking about the budget. She took it as proof of my endless practicality and went back to her coffee. She didn't know that the budget was no longer her concern. A day later, the calls began. The florist first, cheerful at the start, then confused. "Mr. Davis, the payment didn't go through. Did you switch cards?" I told her to send the invoice to the groom. Then the DJ called. Then the catering manager. Each time, I redirected them politely. "Please contact Tyler or his father, Dan. I'm no longer handling those accounts." By afternoon, my phone was buzzing nonstop. I turned it face down and went to mow the lawn. That evening, Laura stormed into the yard, phone in hand. "Michael, what's happening? The planner says half the vendors haven't been paid." I wiped sweat from my forehead and looked at her calmly. "I told them to coordinate with Tyler." She blinked, confused. "Why would you?" I cut her off gently. "Because he made it clear this isn't my day." Her mouth opened, then closed again. I watched the realization flicker behind her eyes, the faint comprehension that the man she'd leaned on for years had finally stopped holding. Over the following days, the silence between us thickened. Tyler called once, his voice tight. "Hey, the vendors are saying payments bounced. Did you change something?" I answered truthfully, "I did." I stopped. A pause. Then, incredulous laughter. "You're kidding." "No," I said. "You asked me to stay quiet. I'm just following orders." He started to speak again, but I ended the call. For years I'd been the invisible safety net. Now I wanted them to feel the fall. Not out of revenge, but balance. If my words had no place at that wedding, my wallet didn't either. That night I took a walk through the neighborhood. Lights glowed in the windows of houses I'd helped repair over the years. Neighbors who thought of me as steady, dependable. I wondered what they'd think if they knew how hollow that steadiness had become. How much of it was just exhaustion disguised as virtue. Back home, I found Laura sitting in the dark living room, her phone glowing in her hand. "He's upset," she said quietly. "He doesn't understand why you do this." I sat across from her, the air heavy with the scent of cut grass and unspoken truth. "He understood enough to erase me," I said. "Now he can understand consequence." She looked at me for a long time, then whispered, "You're hurting him." "No," I replied. "I'm teaching him." We sat in silence, the kind that fills a marriage when everything that should have been said years ago has already rotted inside both of you. By midnight, I had packed the binder with all the canceled invoices and receipts, sealing it like a time capsule of misplaced loyalty. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled. Summer rain, steady and relentless. It sounded like applause for the decision I should have made long ago. The next morning, I woke early, brewed coffee, and watched the storm clouds drift apart. My phone vibrated again. Another notification, another refund confirmation. I smiled faintly at the screen. The world was correcting itself. The accounts were finally balanced. That afternoon, Laura told me Megan's parents had stepped in to help smooth things over. I could hear the strain in her voice, the quiet accusation underneath. But I only nodded. "Good," I said. "Families should take care of their own." She flinched at that, and I almost felt sorry. Almost. For the first time in years, I felt something like peace. Not joy, not triumph, just stillness. I had stopped mistaking silence for virtue. I had learned that sometimes the only way to be heard is to withdraw everything that made you indispensable. They wanted me quiet, so I gave them what they asked for. And in the echo of that silence, I finally heard myself again. The morning of the wedding arrived dressed in pale gold sunlight, the kind that makes everything look deceptively gentle. I woke early out of habit, brewed coffee, and stared at the black suit hanging on the door. I hadn't slept more than 2 hours. My mind kept replaying that single sentence. My stepdad shouldn't really say anything, until the words had lost meaning and become pure sound, a dull hum in my skull. Laura was already gone, off to help with hair and makeup. The house felt weightless without her noise, emptied of warmth but full of clarity. I put on the suit anyway. I told myself I wasn't going to hide. I would stand there and watch, silent, just as I'd been asked. Maybe that was my last duty, to witness the life I'd paid for. The drive to the country club took 40 minutes, long enough for doubt to creep in and then burn away. By the time I parked, I'd become something colder than angry, an observer of my own undoing. The venue was chaos disguised as celebration. White tents rippled in the wind, the manicured lawn glistened with dew, and a few guests milled about uncertainly. From a distance, everything looked expensive, deliberate, beautiful. But as I stepped closer, the cracks showed. The florist's truck sat unopened, bouquets wilting in the heat. The catering staff stood by the delivery van, arms crossed, refusing to unload until payment cleared. The DJ argued with a manager about missing deposits. I recognized the look in their eyes, the calm fury of people who had been promised money and received excuses instead. Tyler was in the center of it all, his jacket off, his phone pressed to his ear. I could hear his voice from across the courtyard. "I don't know what happened. It should have gone through." Megan hovered beside him, whispering frantically. Laura rushed between them and the planner, trying to keep everything from collapsing. No one saw me at first. I moved quietly, blending into the crowd of relatives. When I reached the edge of the patio, I heard my name for the first time that day, Tyler shouting it like a curse. "Mike, did you cancel something? The bank says the payments were reversed." I kept my tone even. "I did." The silence that followed was almost holy. The guests nearby turned, curious. Tyler's face went red. "Why? Are you kidding me? Today? You asked me to stay quiet," I said. "So I did." My money decided to stay quiet too. Megan's eyes widened. Laura's mouth opened but no words came. Around us, vendors began packing their things. The caterer drove off first, muttering. The florist followed, boxes of roses left behind like casualties. The DJ gave up entirely and played music from his phone speaker, tinny and distorted. Within 30 minutes, the entire illusion unraveled. Guests whispered, exchanging looks that sliced deeper than any confrontation. The champagne sat unopened, the tables half set, the air thick with embarrassment. I stood near the bar, hands in my pockets, watching as the chaos unfolded in perfect rhythm. One failure after another, each one echoing the truth I'd known all along, that I was only valuable when paying the bill. Dan arrived late, naturally. He strolled in wearing a suit a shade too bright, sunglasses perched on his head like a crown. For a brief second, the crowd seemed relieved. The real father's here. Tyler rushed to him, desperate. I couldn't hear their words, but I saw the pleading in his gestures, the quick explanations. Dan looked bewildered, then irritated. His lips formed the universal shape of I can't. I almost laughed. The ghost had returned to witness his own legend crumble. He looked at me once, confusion turning to understanding. He knew. Maybe for the first time in his life, he understood what I had carried for him. He didn't speak, he didn't need to. His silence was an admission. Laura approached me then, tears streaking through her makeup. Michael, please, fix this. People are watching. Her voice was part command, part plea. Exactly, I said. They're finally watching. She shook her head, desperate. This isn't you. No, I said quietly. This is me when I stop pretending. Tyler stormed toward me, his face a portrait of betrayal. You ruined my wedding. I met his gaze. No, Tyler. I just stopped funding your fantasy. He looked at his mother for backup, but she had none left to give. Guests began leaving, murmuring condolences that sounded uncomfortably like praise. A few relatives, old enough to remember Dan's disappearing ex, gave me subtle nods, small acknowledgments of the truth no one had dared to speak aloud. As the sun dipped lower, the country club staff started clearing tables. The grand day had collapsed into fragments. Half-melted cake, unused champagne flutes, flowers drying in the wind. Tyler stood in the middle of it all, his tuxedo stained, his bride crying quietly beside him. I felt nothing, not triumph, not regret, just an immense quiet settling inside me, like a door closing after years of noise. I left before the speeches that would never happen. On my way out, I passed Dan sitting alone by the fountain, tie loosened, staring at his phone. He looked up. You really did it, huh? I just stopped lying, I said. He nodded slowly. I guess we both failed him. No, I replied. You abandoned him. I enabled him. There's a difference. He didn't argue. He just looked down, maybe seeing for the first time the wreckage his absence had built. When I reached the parking lot, I could still hear faint music from someone's speaker, a mockery of celebration. The air smelled of cut grass and spilled champagne. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the reflection of the venue lights in the windshield. Then my phone buzzed. Notifications from the bank. Refunds processed, transfers returned, balances restored. It was like the world itself was correcting its mistake. That night, Laura came home late. She didn't speak when she entered, just stood by the doorway, trembling. You humiliated him, she whispered. No, I said. I taught him who he is without me. Her eyes filled with something I couldn't read, grief, anger, maybe fear. Everyone's talking about it. Do you realize what you've done? Yes, I answered. For the first time, I did something that mattered. She left the room, and the house fell into silence thicker than any argument. I poured a drink and sat by the window, watching the moon climb over the trees. Somewhere, I imagined, Tyler was still shouting, trying to rewrite the story, painting me as the villain. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was. But at least the story was finally mine to tell. The next morning, messages poured in. Some from relatives, some from old friends who'd heard the gossip before the cake had even been cleared. Half condemned me. The rest applauded. Even Dan called. His voice was hoarse, uncertain. I didn't realize how much you did for him, he said. Guess none of us did. I wasn't doing it for recognition, I replied. But now I'm done doing it at all. He exhaled. Can't blame you. For the first time in 20 years, I felt something close to equality between us. Not friendship, not forgiveness, but understanding born of mutual failure. When I hung up, the house was quiet again. Laura stayed upstairs, the distance between us turning into geography. I didn't chase her. I had nothing left to explain. In the days that followed, the story spread, distorted by rumor but anchored by truth. Some called me cruel. Others called me brave. I didn't care what name it took. I only knew that I had finally stopped living on borrowed gratitude. Sometimes I catch myself remembering the look on Tyler's face as the wedding unraveled. The confusion, the dawning comprehension. It wasn't hatred that broke him. It was recognition. For the first time, he saw the shape of everything he had taken for granted. And maybe that was the real gift I gave him, the first lesson I ever taught that might actually last. A month passed before the dust settled. In that time, the wedding became a legend whispered around the neighborhood. One of those stories that people repeat with nervous laughter, each retelling making it sound more like a cautionary tale than gossip. "Did you hear about the man who paid for everything and then pulled the plug?" they'd say. Left them with melted cake and a silent DJ. I never corrected anyone. Let them talk. Silence had become my ally. The first week was the hardest. Laura moved through the house like a ghost, speaking only when necessary. Tyler didn't call. Megan posted photos from the honeymoon that looked forced. Smiles too wide, captions too defensive. Every time I scrolled past one, I felt the faintest sting. Not from regret, but from the realization that even ruin could be staged to look beautiful. They were learning from the best. They were learning how to pretend. At work, people treated me differently. Some avoided the subject entirely, afraid to cross an invisible boundary. Others looked at me with quiet respect, the way men do when someone has done the thing they wish they had the courage to do. My boss patted me on the shoulder one morning and said, "Heard you finally drew a line." I didn't answer. There was no pride in what I had done, only necessity. The house, though, told its own story. Laura slept in the guest room for a while. Every creak of the floorboards at night reminded me of how much space had grown between us. Once, she left a note on the kitchen table. "He's your son too, whether you like it or not." I didn't reply. Tyler had made his choice, and so had I. A week later, she packed a suitcase and went to stay with her sister. She didn't call for days. The silence felt both merciful and cruel. I filled my evenings with small rituals. Fixing the fence, repainting the porch, reorganizing the garage. The kind of labor that makes a man feel like he's repairing something even when he's just killing time. I told myself I wasn't waiting for anyone to come back, but each night I found myself glancing at the driveway lights, half expecting her car. Then one Sunday she did return. No warning. I found her sitting on the porch steps at dusk, her eyes red but dry. "He's angry," she said softly. "He says you embarrassed him. Says you destroyed his wedding out of spite." "I didn't destroy anything," I replied. "I just stopped pretending to be what I wasn't." She looked away. "He's my son, Michael. And I was his father in everything but name," I said. Until he reminded me that I wasn't. The words hung between us, heavy and final. She stayed that night but slept on her side of the bed, a gulf of air between us. We didn't touch. We didn't need to. The truth was touch enough. 2 weeks later, Megan called. I almost didn't answer. Her voice was small, stripped of its usual brightness. I wanted to say, "Thank you," she murmured, "for everything you did, even if Tyler can't admit it yet." There was a pause, then a confession. "We've been fighting. About the wedding. About money. About everything." I listened quietly. She went on, tears edging her words. "He says you betrayed him, but I think he knows deep down that he betrayed you first." When the call ended, I sat in the dark living room, staring at the reflection of my own face in the window. I wondered if peace always looked this empty. Eventually, Laura came back for good. She didn't announce it. She simply unpacked her things and started cooking dinner one evening, as if the past month had been a bad dream. We didn't discuss the wedding. We didn't discuss Tyler. There was nothing left to argue about. We had both chosen silence over war. Sometimes, late at night, She would reach for my hand in her sleep. The touch was gentle, hesitant. Forgiveness without words. I didn't pull away. Maybe we both understood that this was as close to reconciliation as we would ever get. Not forgiveness, not amnesia, but the quiet coexistence of two people who had finally stopped lying to themselves. A letter arrived a few weeks later, handwritten, no return address. I recognized Tyler's scrawl instantly. The first line read, "You didn't have to do it that way." The rest was a mix of apology and accusation, as if he couldn't decide which version of me he wanted to hate less. He wrote about the humiliation, the embarrassment, the friends who'd mocked him afterward. Then, near the end, a single sentence stood out. "I guess I understand why you did it, but I wish you hadn't." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer with my receipts and canceled checks. Proof, I told myself, that understanding sometimes arrives too late to matter. Months slipped by. The grass grew tall again, the days shorter. I settled into a rhythm that felt almost monastic. Work, dinner, quiet. On weekends, I'd drive out to the lake, sit by the water, and let the stillness fill me. For the first time in years, I slept without dreams. No late-night calls, no requests for money, no background hum of obligation. Just silence, the kind that doesn't accuse or demand. One evening, I saw Dan at the hardware store. He looked older, smaller somehow, as though time had finally caught up to his guilt. He spotted me in the aisle, hesitated, then approached. "I heard about Tyler," he said. "Things aren't easy for him." "They never were," I replied. "He just didn't notice when I was carrying the weight." He nodded, shame flickering behind his eyes. "You were more of a father than I ever was." "Then why does he still worship you?" I asked. He sighed. "Because I left. You stayed. People always miss what disappears." There was nothing to add to that. He walked away, and for once I felt no anger. Just understanding, the kind that comes too late to help anyone. Winter came early that year. The house felt smaller, but not lonely. Sometimes Laura and I would sit by the fireplace in silence, each of us lost in separate thoughts. There was peace in that, a fragile kind of peace that had to be handled gently or it would shatter. Tyler never came by for the holidays. He sent a card, unsigned, with a photograph of him and Megan on a snowy street. They looked distant even in the picture. I placed it on the mantel beside older photos, the ones from when he was a boy, when he still believed I could fix everything. And maybe that was the real loss. Not the money, not the years, but the illusion that love alone could earn you family. Sometimes I still hear his voice in my head, younger, unscarred. "Thanks, Mike. You're the best." Back then, I would have given anything to hear him call me Dad. Now I know titles mean nothing without respect. Blood means nothing without loyalty. People ask if I regret it. I tell them no. But the truth is more complicated. I don't regret what I did. I regret how long it took me to do it. I spent half my life feeding a fire that was never mine to tend. When I finally let it die, I expected darkness. Instead, I found light. Laura once asked if I thought Tyler would ever forgive me. I said, "Maybe, but that's his burden, not mine." She nodded and we left it there. Now, when I wake in the quiet hours before dawn, I don't feel the familiar weight of guilt pressing against my chest. I feel space, room to breathe, to exist without being defined by someone else's needs. Dan has disappeared again. Tyler and Megan are struggling, learning the lessons I once paid for them to ignore. And me? I'm finally at peace with the silence. Not the kind that isolates, but the kind that cleanses. The kind that says, "You gave enough. You were enough. And you don't owe anyone a single thing more." Maybe that's the real ending. No apologies, no reunions. Just a man sitting in the stillness he earned. I don't know if it makes me cruel or wise. Maybe both. So tell me, after all those years of giving, would you have done differently? Or would you, like me, finally let silence speak the truth that love never could?